Before we get stuck into today's conversation, I'd like all three of us to start by defining three terms that are at the heart of this conversation: circular economy, developing economies, and international development. So if you allow me, I'm going to kick off and give a little attempt at what we mean by the circular economy. So a circular economy is a systems thinking approach that aims to decouple economic activity from the consumption of finite resources. It's based on three principles: designing out waste and externalities, keeping products, materials and components in use, and regenerating natural systems. To deliver on these principles requires certain building blocks. We need good design, more effective collection systems and reverse logistics systems. We need to consider new business models, or business models that perhaps move away from just from ownership towards access. And then, of course, we need enabling conditions. Enabling conditions are paramount. Correct policies, urban planning, education, financing mechanisms. These need to be in place to support this new economic model. We also want it to be distributed and accessible to all. So that's the circular economy. Harald, give us some geographical context here. What kind of countries are we talking about?
Thanks for your definition of a circular economy. It's something that's sometimes framed very technically, but it's something that all combines all of us, a lot of passion in this, the need and the view that we really have to elaborate on changing the system to make sure we can all live in a prosperous way on this planet. And the funny way is that when you ask me about developing economies, it's something that we always was a bit bipolar, or it's black and white. You know, here in the West, in the US and maybe in Europe, there are developed economies. And then out there in the East or in the South, in Africa, Asia, there are developing economies. And I think that's an old paradigm that doesn't really fit our thinking in a circular way. And definitely, when you look at the definitions of developing economies, these are some of the economies that have sometimes maybe a weak industrial base, or as the UN put it into a very different context and saying we want to also start to measure that. And they measured it through the Human Design Index, the HDI Index, and said Human Development Index. What is a developed country? And it's a country where the people can be and they can do what they need to do to have a prosperous life. So in terms of being, this would mean, can they have the health access? Can they have the food access and the shelter they need? But it goes broader, obviously, in terms of what they want to do. Are they able to get the education they want, voting systems, community access that people need to have prosperous and healthy lives? That's how we looked at the definition of a developed economy that is very highly developed in this context, and one that has less access to these kind of services to their citizens. I believe that the circular economy gives a very new opportunity to look into this strange divide between developing and developed countries. And we will have a chance to talk about this a bit later, because the author of the book, Donut Economics, has recently thrown out a whole new way of thinking that I would like to elaborate on a bit further.
Sachin, Arup set up an international development group about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and you've been working for this group, I think, for the last 5 or 6 years. Can you help our audience a little bit and define what do you actually mean by international development?
Yes, thank you very much. And I think just to sort of piggyback on something Harald said, yes, international development concerns itself with developed countries and developing countries. It does carry that definition forward, and further, it hopes, or it aims to achieve balanced development between developed and developing countries. So the focus obviously then is on developing countries, and by balanced growth, what we mean is sort of similar levels of safety, well-being, quality of life, and to me, most importantly, human rights. And international development really is a mechanism to ensure this type of balanced growth, or a way of achieving safety, well-being, quality of life, and human rights.
Because in the title of this session, we have the word paradigm, and this suggests a new set of thought patterns that could be applied to international development, and that there may have been previous paradigms. So Sachin, could you describe the historic evolution of the different approaches to international development, and then also maybe let us know what is the current paradigm?
Yeah. So international development, the way it's defined and it currently stands, is a modern concept, sort of starting that takes into account certain injustices and certain ways that colonial past have shaped the economies of developing countries, and also in post-war states, where particularly in Europe, where there was a lot of reconstruction required. One of the classic sort of roots of international development is the Marshall Plan, which is the U.S.-led economic assistance to rebuild Europe.
In this next slide that I'm sharing with you, is looking into putting the development of a country, the development status of a country, into the context of how many resources are used. And just to explain this to all of you, you would see on the top right corner a country where I'm at the moment living, Netherlands, that is certainly very highly developed in giving the citizens a high development of services, but at the same time, it's also huge in its natural footprint. So it's the country, the Netherlands, are transgressing their biophysical boundaries at a huge level. And this is not only about the Netherlands, this is about most European countries, the US, and you see a couple of others here that are popping up, South Korea, Brazil, Mexico. And this is not about finger pointing at all. China you have in the middle here. It's interesting when you look more to the left here of this overview. Countries that are coming out now as let's say, as more favorable, that we have a more favorable look at. One that was singled out here was Vietnam. Vietnam is quite balanced in servicing its citizens, in giving it the means to live prosperous lives, and at the same time, not too much, or being pretty much within the boundaries that we often talk about that cannot be transgressed, because otherwise life on this planet will not be possible anymore. It is providing for the services of its citizens while not transgressing natural boundaries. And it's a whole new way of looking at the world. You have countries here like also Algeria, Jordan, Sri Lanka, that have a much smaller footprint as countries, for example, in Europe at the moment, and at the same time have a fairly well-developed way of providing what people need for their lives.
What we're arguing for here is that to be able to adopt sustainable development, developing countries no longer need to follow this trajectory from the bottom left corner to the top right corner and then move back to states of circularity, but actually move there in their own way, in their own route, form their own pathways to sort of not, I wouldn't say avoid abundance, but avoid the price of abundance that the developed countries have had to pay, and the earth has to pay for that.
She said, looking at the map, do you think developed economies should experiment with economic degrowth to leave economic and planetary space to developing economies?
I think it's a very, it's always a very interesting question, because the G word, the growth word, it's something that is it's often something we are not really allowed to challenge, because it's the basis of the prosperity that we have seen over the last decades. Let's be very honest here. As soon as we bring the growth paradigm and degrowth paradigm here, then this could be also a serious threat to the debate, because then people start to think in their own ways, because degrowth has been a non-word, or for many a non-word that we shouldn't use and bring up in this context. I think it's truly the growth we want to see. It's not about growth only in GDP, because that's what it often refers to, growth in terms of GDP. Then I would say GDP is not a sufficient way of measuring growth. And I think there's a broad consensus about this, of people who are familiar with the debate and think on how we can redefine this. So then the question becomes, what do we want to measure in the future in terms of, for example, well-being, as Sachin said very eloquently before. Certainly, we want to have more growth of well-being. That's, I think, we all want. That's a huge challenge. We need the smartest mind on the planet to think about this.
But maybe I can just say one thing that's very close to the work that we do, is to sort of move away from the sort of using people-centered just as a tokenistic a way of redefining sort of business as usual practices, but actually really take it seriously. Uh, think about people not just as recipients, but as stakeholders, as authors, as designers, and conceive programs, conceive the way of delivering development through participation rather than mere engagement. I think looking at the other metrics like the Human Development Index, the Gini coefficient, these are definitely things that are helping us move away from sort of monetary basis of measuring development. And certainly they should be more supported, and countries that that have achieved a level of social and economic prosperity should be leading the way into these new paradigms. So yes, definitely, I do agree that European countries have a role to play in leading the way. I would like to though throw in a slight curveball here, because in that there is a need for a type of index, a type of um, uh, a way of measuring prosperity and level of development that is not self-centered. It's not centered on the development of individuals and the country as an insular entity,
Yeah.
but something that, for the lack of better word, supports the greater common good. Looking at a systems approach in terms of how much a country or individuals in a country are supporting the bigger system in order for us to be able to stay above acceptable social ceilings, yet stay within the planetary boundaries.
I also unfortunately believe there's a reason why GDP and post-GDP debates have been going on for many decades. There are big vested interests in this as well. And I think as we explore the circular economy as a concept further, as we make it more tangible, these questions will come more to the fore. The more metrics we have, it becomes more tangible. And hopefully at some point, policymakers will need to pick it up. As we see, I think the whole Al Gore movies that we see, we are moving into a world with a lot of more instability, potential climate crisis. At some point, there will be a point, and hopefully we will be able to act before that point, that we will need to have new metrics on valuing our progress and how the status of our world is. I truly hope that we can be active enough with all the players here around the table and you around the screens all over the world that are listening, that this happens earlier and we can avoid disasters that we sometimes looming in the future if we don't take action now.